Hundreds of years from now, when historians sit down to write about our era of the church and what we did with it, what are they going to say?
Long ago, God called a man named Abram to go forth to a new land with a simple promise. Although Abram was far from perfect, he believed and went. 400 years later, this family, God's people, found themselves enslaved in Egypt. When the cries of the people became too great, God came to the son of a slave. Raised in Pharaoh's palace and in exile for murder, he called Moses to lead his people to freedom. Although far from perfect, he went. 500 years later, God's people had found their home promised to Abram long before. Surrounded by persecution and war, God raised up a lowly shepherd boy, the youngest in his family, to slay giants and bring peace to the land. Although far from perfect, David established a kingdom of peace. That peace didn't last long. What was once a family had grown into a divided kingdom, split by power-hungry rulers. Soon the two kingdoms, north and south, both found themselves conquered and in exile. In the midst of destruction, being held far from their home, God called Ezra and Nehemiah to lead their people back to restore the kingdom. Although far from perfect, they rose to the challenge and led their people home. After generations of silence, an angel of the Lord appeared to a virgin teenager, telling her that she would give birth to a boy, Emmanuel. God became a man. For 33 years, this man, Jesus, taught us how to live, love, and lay down our lives. And as always, God invited imperfect human beings to take his love to the world. This band of fishermen, zealots, and tax collectors, empowered by his Spirit, went. Although far from perfect, God used them to start the greatest movement of love this world has ever known. As the movement grew, Saul, a persecutor of these Christians, encountered God. Commissioned by Christ himself, Saul, now Paul, journeyed further than anyone before him. Although far from perfect, he brought the gospel to foreign peoples, cities, and nations. This movement of love that started in Jerusalem exploded far beyond the city and family in which it began. They were called ecclesia, a gathering, a people. What we would call in English, the church.
The church is essentially people, the body of Christ, working together to bring God's kingdom here, now. I think it's easy sometimes to look back at our history and the failures of the church, the imperfections, and think that that's the majority of who we are, but there has been so many victories and so many miracles, and God is not intimidated by the fact that we are imperfect. If anything, he loves to use just fractured human beings. It writes a more beautiful story, a better story, when he does it that way than any other way. The people that really moved forward the church in history. People like Paul, people like Barnabas, people like Peter. Sometimes these men and women can seem so out of reach. They can seem so beyond our capacity of where we are today. And yet it was simply their willingness to be a part of what God was doing in their time, in their place. And I see that same willingness in the church today. And so this is our story. When God said go to the ends of the earth, this means we go to our homes, this means we go to our workplace, this means we go to the places that God has us in. But for some of us, it means going to the unreached people that have never heard the gospel.
You know, always I had the passion and the desire to do ministry in India, reaching the unreached. I was visiting one of my friends in Darjeeling, and I was standing with him on a roadside, and he got a phone call from one father, and he had 2 girls, and he was trying to sell the girls, and I'm standing there with this great challenge. What do we do right now? And God started to speak to me, and we need to do something to take care of these girls and unwanted children. And that was the turning point. God was showing me something, and this is opportunity. You can do something. And I made the decision to do something. And we took 8 girls first, and we started a home. And that home grown to like 23 girls right now we have. And we also have other 2 boys' homes. In India, parents, they take their own children to the Hindu temple to sacrifice their children. The question came to my mind, why are they doing this thing? Sometimes we get angry and upset. So then I started to think the reason they're doing it, they don't know Jesus. So most of the unreached villages, they have a system. When we send someone from outside, like missionaries or pastors, to plant a church in those villages, they cannot just go there. They will kill you when you go and do that, those places. So we do a free medical camps. Then we start like a preschool for their children. So then slowly we get this opening, and it's all about relationship. So that kind of opens the door. Then slowly we will do the church planting ministry. You bringing the gospel to these dark places. When you go there, you can see there is a church, and they're caring for each other, and they're worshiping living God now. They're not worshiping idols, they're worshiping living God. And it's a total transformation. I don't see a plan B. I think God given this vision and mission to the church. When I said church, it is you and me. Now we can worship a living God. Man, I cannot sit in my house and enjoy this. I want other people to know.
In 250 AD, the plague of Cyprian struck Rome. For 20 years, the epidemic ravaged the empire, wiping out 2/3 of Rome's population. At its height, killing an estimated 5,000 people every day. Chaos ensued. Anyone showing symptoms was immediately ostracized. Those infected were thrown out into the street and left to die. Rotting corpses littered the streets. Hell on earth. But while the masses were running out, Christians ran in. Inspired by the example of their Lord Jesus, they brought in supplies, comforted families, and sat with those who were beyond return. The price of compassion was steep, as many believers who had gone in to provide aid lost their lives. But the bravery of these faithful men and women caught the attention of the world. Eyewitnesses wondered what caused these Christians to risk their own lives for the sake of others. And soon the gospel spread dramatically all throughout Rome. By 313 AD, Christianity became the official religion of the Roman Empire.
I had an encounter where I was at work and we're just right outside of Skid Row, and a homeless guy came up to us and I told him to leave us alone, and he actually took out a Bible and he told me, God's telling me to tell you to start leading these people, and he pointed to Skid Row, and I was just like, dude, just leave me alone, get out of here. And he got really angry and he's like, no, and he keeps pointing to a verse in a Bible and he's like, God's telling me you need to start leading these people. And then he folded up a Bible, put it back in, he just started acting nuts again. Like, it was like nothing ever happened. It was like, so that kind of was like the beginning. And basically Skid Row is it's a bunch of shelters and government housing mixed in some property, and it's just a whole bunch of just homeless people that come throughout the world to come visit them. What's up, Cricket? When I first got here, I didn't really like Skid Row. Like, I was a worship leader for years, but like, I mean, if anybody ever did a heart check on me, it's like the one thing I did not want to deal with was like homeless. I truly feel though, like this is like where church is supposed to be, and this is like real church to me though. Project 54, it's literally our best attempt to do life with people, with our homeless friends. I think with our faith, we kind of just like, oh, help, I don't want to get invested. Because when you get invested, that means you have to give yourself, and then that's a scary moment when you actually have to give yourself.
My name is Eugene Carr V, but they call me Cricket, AKA Two-Face. Yeah,
I like Cricket better. We think we're doing the right thing, and we'll go up and we're like, oh, I'll give you a sandwich, right? And then you walk away. But you gotta understand that guy, you know, we had a guy say, I felt invisible, like no one cared about me. And then a person came up to me, handed me a sandwich and walked away. He's like, then when they just walked away without even saying my name, asking to know me, he's like, I literally just wanted to kill myself there. Heaven forbid I actually had to have a conversation with you. It's like how many times do we say hi to people and say, oh, hey, how you doing, right? And then you just walk away, right? But you didn't even like care. You really didn't care. You just want to be polite. And I feel like that's what we are. We're just being polite towards homeless people, but no one's actually saying like, hey, well, like, hey, what's going on, man? Like, how you doing? Here's a sandwich, but how are you doing? What happens if I actually have to care about this community? And I have to care about their struggles. And I gotta be there when they need me the most. And I gotta be there just to listen to their pain, or listen to them talk about suicide, or listen to them talk about their addiction. People always ask me like, what's like the big question, the big Christian question, what's the answer to suffering, right? Like, how do you solve suffering, right? And it's like, I really feel like the only answer is just being with people. And people are like, that's not an answer. I'm like, it's literally the answer. I think it's so weak, like when people are just like, well, you know, you're too hard on yourself. Don't, you know, oh, you shouldn't let it affect you. Really? It's so weak to say like, I'm not supposed to suffer with someone. I'm not supposed to feel their pain. Like, that's a horrible relationship. And then you look at yourself and like, but man, I live in Orange County and like, where did this come out of, this life that I live, you know? Like, where did it end up now, where now I'm like looking at dead bodies in morgues just trying to find my homeless friend, you know? And everyone's just like, it's too much on you. But it's like, no, this is exactly where I want to be. I think this is exactly where God called us to be.
As Christianity spread, the Bible was canonized, copied, and shared throughout the known world. However, production was slow, with each copy written by hand. copies became incredibly rare and far too expensive for the common person. Despite the valiant effort of monks and monasteries all across Europe, copies of the Bible could not keep up with the rapid spread of the gospel. For centuries, followers of Jesus were forced to rely on the priest's interpretation of the text. Between 1440 and 1450, Johannes Gutenberg invented the printing press. By 1500, this process was being used across Europe, and books, including the Bible, were mass-produced. Amidst this revolution, Martin Luther, a German priest and professor, became concerned for the church. Luther wrote his concerns at what we now call his 95 Theses and nailed them to his church door, sparking controversy and healthy debate. With literature and the Bible more readily available, the Protestant Reformation began. August 6, 1991, the World Wide Web went live. Today, we have more information in the palm of our hands than any library could hold.
I'm not a big social media guy, I'm not a technology guy, I'm a preacher. But I have a message. Numerically, there's many more people running away from church than running to church that are younger. As they say, the average millennial spends at least 4 to 6 hours a day staring at their phone. And so God kind of gave us this unique strategy to interrupt their media, talk to them about their pain, their crisis, and move them into a conversation that shares with them how Christ interacts with those things. The name of the organization is Groundwire. We communicate the gospel online. Okay, first quarter 2018, we had 12,147 people say, I need Jesus. I mean, technology just changed the game, and it's given us opportunity to meet with people, have conversations with people that are never gonna walk into a church. We have people that have been trained who are ready there when their computer rings and somebody says, does Jesus really care about me? Naomi was a 19-year-old girl. She logged in one day and she said, hey, I just saw this commercial. It says, when life hurts, Jesus cares. She said, my life hurts. She's instantly connected to Bev. Bev is one of our amazing coaches in California, and begins to share her story about Jesus. Jesus will never leave you or forsake you. He'll be with you all the time, no matter what you go through. And Naomi interrupted her. She said, today was my last day. Notes written, I'm sitting next to 168 pills. And so they prayed. 4 months after, Bev emailed me and she said, Naomi just texted me, she just got baptized last Sunday. The amazing thing about your generation is there are no limits. And so with your wisdom about technology, and I mean, we can reach people all over the world, we can meet needs that we struggle to meet. Man, my challenge is go for it.
(1623). Antoinette and Etienne Pascal gave birth to their only son. He was a unique child with tremendous curiosity. His name was Blaise Pascal. Inspired by 2 mentors who helped the family through a difficult time, Blaise began following Jesus at a young age. Instead of his new faith taking him away from his studies, it drove him deeper. Determined to use his mind to make the world better, he devoted his life to academia and made significant contributions. Pascal created one of the first calculators to help his father, a tax collector, with his arithmetic, and by 1652, he had 50 prototypes completed. Although only living to be 39 years old, he greatly influenced the fields of geometry, physics, and computer science, inspiring future innovators like Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz and Sir Isaac Newton. Pascal's faith drove him to use his gifts to bless the world. His ministry came in the form of invention, philosophy, and creation that inspired faith in others and pointed to his creator.
I'm from a small farm town in Minnesota and didn't really vibe with what everyone else was doing there. When I came to mines, I knew I wanted to do something with biomechanics. But as I've come here, I've been able to refine why I want to do it as well as what I'm doing. I personally think that research and development and engineering's worth comes from its ability to help people. Within mechanical engineering, there's a subset that deals specifically with the human body and looking at the human body as a machine. This is actually a swimming foot, so people can use this in the water. So this is carbon fiber. This is a hand crank cycle, so this is for someone who cannot use their legs, whether they're paralyzed or have an amputation. So this allows them to cycle via hand motion. This lab is all about adaptive equipment and assistive technology and just engineering solutions for people based off of what they need and what their disability is just slightly hindering them from doing. That's one of the reasons why I like biomechanics, is it has to do with the human body. Like, you're dealing with a person, so you have to talk with them, and you get to listen to them, and you get to set yourself aside for a second and ask how life is, like, really, and care. I'm not called to be an engineer. I'm called to love Jesus. And through that, I get to use the abilities that He has given me to love people well. I'm doing this for the person, for the kid, for whoever that felt left out, that felt excluded because of something that they didn't do, that they couldn't control, that was not up to them. The world is cruel sometimes, and to restore a sense of dignity and normalcy and show them that, yes, I can help repair your physical body, but I know someone who can repair your spiritual body. And to be the hands and feet of Jesus for people's hands and feet on this earth, I think that's a pretty cool manifestation of Jesus the healer.
In the 18th century, the Atlantic slave trade was active and growing. Slave traders from Europe sailed to Africa and traded goods for humans. They would then take their slaves to the Americas to sell them for profit. One of these slave traders was a man named John Newton. Growing up on the sea, he realized he could turn a profit being involved in this transportation process. One night, a violent storm off the coast of Ireland woke Newton up. Running out of his cabin, he saw a large hole in the ship, and the boat began taking on water. In a moment of desperation, Newton cried out to God, asking Him to spare his life and promising to devote himself to serving the church. In that moment, cargo tipped over and plugged the hole in the ship, allowing the crew to weather the storm and make it safely to shore. Newton continued trading slaves, but the more he learned about this Jesus, the more unsettling his lifestyle became. Eventually, Newton had had enough. He left the slave trade and worked to further the church in England. A talented songwriter, Newton composed 280 hymns over the next several decades. One of them speaking of the grace that saved a wretch like him. Around the same time, a younger, zealous man named William Wilberforce was climbing his way up the political ranks of Europe. With enthusiasm and passion, his platform grew, but a big conversion moment inspired him to leave politics and join the clergy. Until he met John Newton. Newton began mentoring Wilberforce. Sharing a common hatred for the slave trade, Newton helped Wilberforce see that the most effective way to create change was not to abandon politics, but instead embrace the platform God had given him and use his influence to fight slavery. His persistence, humility, and tenacity to end the evil trade of slaves inspired younger politicians to join the battle and disarmed the opposition. On July 26, 1833, the House of Commons passed a bill to legally end all slavery in the British Empire. 3 days later, Wilberforce passed away. William Wilberforce pioneered human rights movements, paving the way for future fights against oppression of all types. Over a century later, a third-generation pastor led a nonviolent boycott of the bus system in Montgomery, Alabama, to protest the unfair treatment of African Americans. His name was Martin Luther King Jr. Taking several cues from Wilberforce, King went on to become a prominent leader of the civil rights movement. He fearlessly marched for equality and painted a picture of his dream of a unified nation. He never ceased fighting hatred with love. Despite being arrested, stabbed, having his house bombed, and ultimately being shot and killed. As King and his team marched and rallied for civil rights, several anthems urged them on. One such anthem was written by a former slave trader who had inspired a politician to fight and abolish slavery as the amazing grace of Jesus echoed into the future for the freedom of all mankind.
Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now I'm found. Was blind, but now I see.
It is for freedom that Christ has set us free. And it's this mere fact that we are free, therefore we actually have authority to set other people free. And as the church that is on the earth right now, it's actually so important that we have the revelation that this is our injustice while we're alive. And that when we read the history books, we read about these amazing people, William Wilberforce being one of them, that did incredible things when they were alive, but to realize that we are writing history right now.
'Twas grace that taught my heart to fear, and grace my fears relieved. How precious did that grace appear the hour I first believed.
The mission statement of A21 is to abolish slavery everywhere, forever. So I talk to people all the time that want to be involved in fighting human trafficking, and I really say to them, figure out what you're good at and then use that to fight slavery. We're actually missing a lot of pieces because we need law enforcement, we need government, we need teachers in the classroom who can identify kids that might be victims. I do not want government and law enforcement to look at Christians and organizations that have the name Jesus stamped on them as the lesser ones in the fight because we're not doing things well. We need actually the world to look up to us and be like, how are they doing what they're doing? And it's because God is always doing a new thing. He's always going to tell us things He's never told us before. He's going to do things He's never done before.
I want the people to remember the church as a sending church, loving church, compassionate church, a caring church.
I think we forget, like, that's like literally like Bible 101, you know. When Jesus came down here, it was like He ate with them, he hung out with them.
One of the reasons that we're losing ground in this nation is because we never talk about Christ outside of the building. Why don't we actually take the message where they are as opposed to asking them to reluctantly come where we want them to be?
If we really want to create something and make something that this world sees as valuable, we have to go to Him first.
I hope that people look back and they remember us as the generation that had a revelation that justice was in Jesus, and we walked that out across the earth.
When we are the church, the world listens. We have the answer that the world is looking for. Whether they can put it into words or not, people are desperate for hope, love, joy, truth. They crave Jesus. I think back on how God has pieced together this story, and while it is far from perfect, he has used the willing. Jesus modeled for us how to go, how to speak, to love freely, to risk fully, and we've seen the impact when individuals have lived it. We've cared for the poor, the dying. We've created and innovated. We've shown more of God's glory. We've spoken up. We've fought with love. And now we stand in our moment, and the future's calling, asking us to be the church, to serve, to love, to risk for our family, our friends, our cities, and our world. Hundreds of years from now, my prayer is that people would say that we were the church, and I believe we will be. They will say that we were the generation that stepped up, that used our gifts, our talents, our platforms that we were given to move this world to Jesus. And so when historians sit down and they write about our era of the church, our moment in history, I hope that they say that while we were far from perfect, that we loved well, we gave freely, we spoke up, that we were the church.
Amazing grace, how sweet